Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. All right, ready to give a few thoughts about Eternal Strands. This is from the video game studio Yellow Brick Games, and it's available for Xbox and PlayStation, Steam as well for $40. I want to thank the developers for providing me with a review code to check out and give my thoughts on. This will be a first impressions review with some comments about potential themes and messaging as well, after spending close to 5 hours playing the game. The Steam description says, fight epic, towering creatures while blending magical abilities with an arsenal of powerful weapons to keep the world from crumbling in this third-person action-adventure game. So at the start, you are sent out to explore these giant areas on behalf of the group that you are with. These group of I think they're called weavers, magic user type people. And each of these giant areas, they're quite huge. Initially, I thought maybe the whole game would just take place in the first main area. It gets its own big full screen map with sub areas to the whole thing. But there's actually more than one of these, at least two, probably more than that. And in each one, there's nooks and crannies and branching paths and verticality. And all the more you experience that as you remember to take advantage of climbing almost anything, which you can do in this game. But the first giant area felt familiar fairly fast, and the limitations of scope became a little bit more clear with time in terms of like how they're using their assets and kind of reusing them and stuff. So I'll get to that in a minute. I gained access to a second giant area within 2 to 3 hours, but I felt kind of under-leveled for it, as it were. There are no levels or XP. It's all gear-based, but my gear felt inadequate. And so I thought, okay, so I probably need to stay in this first area and upgrade my gear to feel more ready for the second area. But the path to upgrading my gear was not as clear as I'd like. I mean, sure, I get a list of components that I need to upgrade it, but no idea in the description of these materials where they come from in the environment or from enemies, so I think you'll kind of need to enjoy experimentally attacking inanimate objects, shrubs, rocks, and trees, as well as enemies, of course, to see what they yield, keeping track of what yields what. And, sometimes things yield different things, different components, depending on what you attack them with. And so there's just a little bit more information that I really wanted about the nature of materials and how and where you find them. The visuals have that modern cell animated series design style. It's not actually cell animated, but it looks like, in the art book that's the design bible for the whole thing, it would be, that in that style. That's not my favorite, but it obviously has appeal given its common use these days, and it's done well here. It sits in that halfway point between overly kiddie and whimsical and like really actually serious. And I can roll with that. Again, I lean more toward the more serious and more realistic looking, but I can vibe with this if the other things are falling into place for me. The creature designs are also fairly unique, with traditional fantasy monsters being replaced with things like ancient robots and spine-backed wolves, stealth-cloaked chameleons, fire-breathing little wasps or insects or something, giant ones, I don't know. And that's about all that I remember, and it wasn't until toward the end of my time playing the first about 5 hours that I ran into the flying fire things. I wish there would have been a little bit more variety in the creatures that you run into, especially since you're going to be fighting them pretty much anytime you see them. I'll get to that also in a second. The nicely executed cartoonish art style hides a solid challenge, I think. I was playing this on the easiest difficulty, as I usually do, because I suck at games. But I was still dying multiple times in the first hour, which is very unusual for me when I'm playing on, whatever a game's easiest difficulty is. It's got a stamina system, so for everything that you do, whether you're climbing or swinging or, all that kind of stuff, running around, you're losing some stamina. It's not quite Souls-like. It doesn't feel like it's that stamina dependent, but if you button mash attack, you're likely to tire yourself out and be left vulnerable to dangerous attacks. So you definitely always need to be at least somewhat aware of your stamina. And then they've got a little gauge that appears next to your character, so it's very easy to see. The bow and arrow also felt largely useless to me. You start out with basically a sword and shield as your melee attack, and then you have a bow and arrow option as well. So, but I mean, that whole potential half of my approach to combat, it felt useless to me because there's no aim assist, and I usually rely on that a lot. So you're getting, if you're new to my content, you're getting a window into just how bad I am as a player. But yeah, I when I'm playing on console, on gamepad as I prefer, I really want aim assist, and you can temporarily slow down time to line up your shots, but I still kind of suck at it, and so it just was unappetizing. Even if it was serviceable now and then. So this entire potential half of the weapon-based combat at the opening hours, I just didn't feel like interacting with at all. Especially since one shot wasn't killing enemies, even when I was surprising them, they hadn't noticed me yet. And then they close the distance on you pretty quick. And on that note, enemies spot you and move toward you earlier and from further away than most games I play. And once they spot you, they are determined. They follow you for much longer as you run away from them than any game I've played recently. I quickly realized that, okay, almost any time I see an enemy, I should plan on having to fight that enemy. And that's annoying to me when I'm trying to, at times, just get from A to B to get something, and I'm still feeling overmatched by the poison-spitting chameleons who are virtually invisible and so hard to hit as a result, and also inflict damage over time on top of their regular attack damage. Man, I hate those chameleons. And it's not like you're gaining XP from attacking them. You're getting components, and they're not necessarily useful components that are going to get you the upgrade that you want. So the repetition and the inevitability was it's a bummer. And yeah, so combat encounters just kind of became tiresome before too long. I have fought one of the giant creatures so far that are the big selling point of the game, and even on easy, it felt like it was a close call. And when I tried again later, I failed. Maybe their stats were a little bit different. Something about them was a little different because it was a different time of day, and the environments changed a little bit. Things about the game changed a little bit when the weather changes. So maybe that's why I had more trouble the second time. I don't know. I can appreciate, though, the appeal of climbing on giant creatures and hacking away at their weak spots. There's some cool, victorious underdog vibes that felt great when he finally fell. So I get the appeal. If I was better at action games, I might feel like pushing forward into the second area of this game. But as a cautious player, and with the pushback in difficulty being more than I'm used to and comfortable with, even on the easiest difficulty, I felt compelled to just keep exploring and grinding in the first area as much as possible before heading into the second. I just figured, it's not supposed to be pushing back this hard, is it? I must be able to do some upgrading that I haven't done yet. And there's a cost to death. You respawn back at camp, but you lose most of your gathered materials, which are your means of upgrading. So it's a bit like losing XP when you die. And there's nothing to be done except go back out and start gathering again. There isn't a Souls-like option to gather what you dropped at your corpse back wherever you died. No, it's gone. You just start gathering again, apart from the few items you're able to save when you die. Time is also passing as you leave and return from expeditions or sleep at the camp, creating both day and night environmental changes and extreme weather changes, like seeing almost an entire map covered in snow or frost. Or, as I discovered late in my time playing the opening hours, a very hot, kind of summery, very dry environment where things are more flammable. Rather than being about exploring a massive world, and the maps are very large, but it's certainly not an open world. So rather than it being about that, it's seemingly more about exploring and interacting in a wider variety of ways within a relatively smaller and richer game world space. Magic and environmental elements are more ways that you can interact with the world and with enemies. You can start fires that damage enemies by shooting an explosive plant near an enemy if it gets close enough. Or you can freeze all or part of an enemy with your ice magic to disable their movement for a bit, or to deal with a fire that you want to get past. Telekinesis magic also lets you manipulate the environment, creates another option in combat. If an enemy's getting too close, you want a little distance, then you can use telekinesis, throw them back, and then while they're stunned, you can move in and start hacking at them with your sword. So that's an option as you get used to using that. Your tools, abilities, and the environment all create gameplay that I think suits creative play styles and will likely appeal to players who have a mind for quick and creative puzzle solving. Sadly, I'm not one of those players. Immersive sims, and this isn't, I don't think, an immersive sim, but bear with me. Immersive sims like Dishonored and Prey, where you're meant to use your environment, physics, and manipulative abilities to your advantage, those kinds of games do not come naturally to me at all. So I need to be clear that much of my frustration with Eternal Strands at this point is about me and not the game. But I do wish that the easy difficulty was much easier, so I could more slowly acclimate myself to the need to think creatively and use the tools and mechanisms at my disposal. I'm not used to this type of game, and I wish it would let me get used to it a little bit more slowly. Instead, I kind of resorted to whatever form of grinding I could find. I come from, much more of a RPG player background, whether that's a turn-based or action. When you run into when you meet resistance, you grind. That's what you do. And but that's in this kind of game, I think, a pretty narrow approach to becoming more effective in combat, and I would assume surely slowed down my progress to a crawl compared to what the devs want or expect me to do. I think they're expecting me to buckle down and learn these different tools and systems and keep them in mind and think creatively in the moment about how I can better leverage them. But that's just not me. But I share all this to say that if, like me, you are not a natural fit for action games that require your clever leveraging of physics systems, you may find, like I did, that the opening hours are a turnoff. But I'll bet that others of you will feel like that's a huge draw. And I'm happy for those kinds of players to have a game like Eternal Strands to play. The story has me a little curious, but not enough to really be what pulls me forward through the game. Dialogue between the main character and companions is handled using still images and dialogue boxes with voice acting reading the lines. You are presented with some dialogue options now and then, but they seem more about giving you opportunity to pursue topics of interest than they do about role-playing a personality type. But although the story isn't a real draw for me, it does have a couple elements that may be noteworthy to Christians. So let me focus on kind of like what I see emerging potentially from the themes in the game at this point. You are part of an outcast demographic of magic users, hated for things that their demographic has done in the past. And they're trying to be true to their heritage and reclaim their heritage. The population at large rejects you because of something bad that happened to them at the hands of others in your demographic. And that's interesting. I think that when we think about different demographics that could be slotted into this and could kind of feel a connection with this, there would probably be maybe some ethnic demographics, but one of them certainly that I think could relate to this is Christians. We know very well what it's like to at least hear about people kind of being angry with Christians or hating Christians or having a certain negative view about Christians because of what certain Christians have done in the past that's either been in the headlines or maybe that they've experienced firsthand in their lives. And then we kind of feel that sense of antagonism from people as a result of things that others that also identify themselves as Christians, others have done. And so we're kind of in this situation, okay, like how do we move forward from here? How do we remain true and engage the life of faith and do that well and not contribute to the mess that other people, other Christians in the past have made? So it's kind of an interesting parallel there. I highly doubt there's anything intentional, in terms of a parallel to Christians that's in the mind of the developer, but I found that interesting. Of note to me in this game is a married couple with a reversal of traditional traits as far as men and women go. This is what we needed 20 years ago. We need, well, I'm going to need more time to see if the male character in this marriage is kind of lacking in strength. He doesn't seem to be like this pushover softy, who's just like always talking about how great his wife is and he's incapable and stuff. It's not that kind of thing. I think that's kind of like an extreme where you can go. But so far, he just seems to be the more intellectually and aesthetically inclined and the romantic of the two. And his wife is more practical, hands-on. She's the blacksmith, so she's buff as well, And this is cool. We need greater variety in our examples of heterosexual gender traits. A lot of confusion and harmful paths have been traveled by people who were given an all too narrow definition of what men are supposed to be like and what women are supposed to be like. And some of that has been perpetuated by Christians drawing from culture and tradition instead of drawing from scriptural models of godly men and women who didn't always fit into 1950s American stereotypes for traits and behavior of heterosexual men and women. So anyway, assuming there isn't some weird curveball coming later in the game, I appreciate the originality of what they are modeling here in this less than conventional example of a married man and woman. Anyway, in summary, despite not being drawn to this art style, the art style ended up working solidly for me. And although I'm not the audience for this game's mechanics, I can imagine developing an appreciation for them, and maybe even learning to love this kind of game. But the straw that breaks the camel's back for me, what keeps me from going on that journey here, is the vulnerability I feel on the easiest difficulty. To progress, I feel like I'm expected to leverage options that I'm just not used to thinking about yet, which nearly grinds my progress to a halt as I slowly learn to fight my personal tendencies. For those already wired to enjoy this kind of gameplay, I can imagine they'll have some fun. But it's not quite the welcome to those new to the gameplay style that I need to keep me pushing forward. And those are all of my thoughts for now on Eternal Strands. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.